Hello, my name is Wendy. 5 years I paid their mortgage. Not once did I ask for anything back. I covered the roof, the bills, even the groceries when they said times were hard. And then one afternoon, I opened a beige folder they didn't mean for me to see. Everything was left to my stepsister. No warning, no explanation, just my name missing, like I'd never existed. They said I didn't need the house because I was the strong one. But if I was so strong, why did they spend years pretending I didn't matter? Why did they erase me so completely? And if I hadn't found that folder, would I have ever known? I never thought a beige folder could change the way I saw my family. It was a chilly Wednesday afternoon in late February, gray clouds hanging low like they hadn't moved in days. I was at my dad's place in Tacoma, same house I grew up in. The smell of old carpet and pine sol still clung to the walls like they were part of the insulation. He'd called me 2 nights ago, said the refinancing paperwork was too much to deal with, and asked if I could swing by. Said his head hurt just thinking about it. Of course, I said yes. I always did. So there I was, seated at the creaky kitchen table, surrounded by scattered envelopes, outdated utility bills, and a half-drunk mug of instant coffee. My dad, Wendell, was dozing in his recliner in the living room, TV muttering to no one. The stack of documents in front of me was barely organized, most of it yellowed or folded like it had been through more than one drawer. I sorted through it like I always did, quietly, quickly, efficiently. The silence was comfortable in the way that long-term detachment often is, and then I found it. The folder was tucked beneath a tax envelope dated 4 years back, its label typed in neat capital letters. Estate Plan, Last Will Testament. I blinked. It felt heavy, even though it was probably no more than 6 sheets thick. I hesitated, fingers tracing the edge. This wasn't part of the task, technically. But when you've been the one keeping things afloat, organizing, paying, handling, all of it, you start feeling like you're allowed to know. So I opened it, and my heart stopped. Callista's name appeared over and over. Callista Dawn Wexler, that long string of letters I'd memorized from years of hearing it praised, was listed as the sole inheritor of the property, the savings account, the vehicle titles, even the life insurance. There was one sentence that mentioned me. Just one. We love both of our daughters. That was it. No property, no percentage, no footnote. I sat back, the chair creaking beneath me as I stared down at the papers. My hands weren't shaking, but they felt cold. My name, the one that used to be on birthday cakes and PTA rosters, didn't belong anywhere in the future of this family. It wasn't just that I'd been left out, it was that they never intended to tell me. The microwave beeped behind me. I didn't flinch. In my mind, I could hear Verena's voice, syrupy and smooth. Sweetheart, we're just trying to be fair. Callista's had a rough time. I could see it all like a slideshow. Me working weekends to help cover the mortgage, wiring payments without question, answering frantic calls from my father when the roof leaked. 5 years of that. Quiet support. No demands. And this was what I got. I flipped through the pages again, half expecting to find a correction, a side note, a mistake, but it was all clean, deliberate. I didn't even realize how much time had passed until the recliner squeaked and I heard Dad's footsteps entering the kitchen. You done yet? He asked, rubbing his temple like I'd somehow caused the headache. I didn't say anything at first. I just held the folder up. This what you wanted help with? He paused, his eyes narrowing slightly. No. That's just... It's not what it looks like. I didn't blink. Everything goes to Callista. He shifted his weight, uncomfortable. Don't read too much into it. It's more complicated than that. I nodded, still calm. I wasn't going to make a scene. I wasn't the kind who threw things or screamed. But something in me was beginning to calcify. Is it? I asked. Wendy, he sighed, like I was being unreasonable. You've always been independent, Callista. She's different. I noticed. The folder was still in my hand. I placed it gently on the table. I've been paying your mortgage for 5 years. He didn't respond. And I'm not mentioned, except to say you love us both. More silence. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a car door slammed. A neighbor's dog barked once. So I'm just the one who pays the bills, not the daughter who matters? He didn't answer. He looked at the floor. That silence told me everything. He didn't look at me. He just said, "You wouldn't understand." I didn't press him further, not because I lacked the words, but because I already knew where this would go. Conversations like these had a pattern in our family: subtle dismissal, then a guilt-laced apology that never quite landed, followed by a sudden change of subject. So instead, I stood, folded the folder neatly, and placed it back on the pile like nothing had happened. By the time I left the kitchen, Wendell was already pretending to fix the TV input, jabbing the remote with a little too much focus. I drove home in silence. The usual FM station didn't feel right, so I let the static hum fill the space. That night, I poured myself a glass of red, kicked off my shoes, and opened my laptop. I wasn't planning to dig, not at first, but something about that folder, it sat in my mind like a splinter. I logged into my online banking account and pulled up 5 years of mortgage transfers. Every single one was there, methodical and regular, same amount every month. I clicked on one, then another. Each payment was made to Verena's personal account. My jaw clenched. When I first agreed to help, she told me, "It'll just be temporary. We need a little help until things stabilize." Stabilize. That was the word she used when they drained my savings for a roof replacement in 2020. I checked Callista's name next. A quick search of the county property records told me what I feared. The deed had been updated last year. Verena had transferred the house to Callista, under the pretense of early estate planning. The house I'd been paying for wasn't even theirs to leave to me anymore. It was already hers. I sat back in the chair. My hand reached for the wine, but I paused. Not yet. Not until I understood how deep this went. Next, I scrolled through my email history. The emails from Verena read like grocery lists: short, cold, always urgent. "Can you cover this month's insurance? Dad needs some dental work, just a couple hundred. Callista's car broke down again. Can you help?" I always said yes, not because I was gullible, but because I believed family meant showing up. Clearly, I was the only one working with that definition. I shut the laptop. It was past midnight, but I couldn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the blank wall. That feeling I had earlier, that hollow in my stomach, wasn't confusion anymore. It was clarity. By morning, I had a plan. I made myself coffee, stronger than usual, and pulled out a legal pad. At the top, I wrote, "What I paid for." Below that, I began listing it all. Mortgage, 60 months. Roof repairs, plumbing in 2020, new washer/dryer, reimbursed, no. Grocery bills, recurring, cash. I didn't stop until 3 pages were filled, and even then I knew I was missing things. Mid-morning, I drove to the post office. I needed a printed copy of the property transfer records, something official. The clerk printed it with a thud and handed it over. Callista's name was in bold. I walked out into the crisp February air, and that's when I saw it. A Facebook post. I don't know what made me open the app, habit maybe, but there it was, right at the top. A photo of Callista sitting on the front porch of the house I'd kept running all these years. She held a mug in her lap, with Wendell smiling in the background. The caption read, "Grateful for the chance to give back. My heart has always belonged to this home." The comments were worse. "You're an angel for taking care of them. So proud of you, Callie. You're keeping that family together. Some people just disappear when they're needed, not you." My chest burned. I scrolled faster. The final comment made me freeze. It was from Verena. "She's always been our rock. Some daughters just take." Callista gives. That wasn't a misfire. That was intentional. I didn't comment. Didn't react. I just closed the app and stared at the traffic light turning red in front of me. Back at home, I opened a new folder on my computer and labeled it Legal Personal. I dropped in the PDFs of the mortgage payments, the county record, and a screenshot of the Facebook post. Then I opened a second folder, Media Strategy. I wasn't going to fight them with screaming matches and hallway arguments. I was going to let the facts speak. But first, I needed to gather them. Later that evening, I got a call from Wendell. I didn't pick up. He left a voicemail that said, "Hey, just checking in. Verena said you left kind of fast the other day. Everything good?" Good? I'd never felt clearer. I put my phone face down on the kitchen table. My coffee had gone cold 2 hours ago, and I hadn't noticed. It was early, barely light out, and Tacoma was still tucked beneath that usual gray sky, the kind that made you think nothing new would ever happen again. But something had. Callista had claimed the house, not just in paper or legality, but in story, in myth. And stories, especially the ones dressed up to look like love and service, were harder to fight than facts. I hadn't meant to check Facebook that morning. It was instinct. Thumb flick. Bright screen. But then it loaded. And there it was, a picture of her ladling soup into Dad's bowl, all soft smiles and filtered glow. The caption read, "Some daughters give their all, some just disappear." The anger didn't hit right away. First came the breathlessness, like someone had pressed their hand to my chest and pushed. Beneath the post, comments poured in. "Callie, you're such a blessing. They're lucky to have you. This world needs more daughters like you. I know someone in my family who just stopped showing up to... Shameful." Every word felt like a brick. Then I saw my cousin Dana's comment. "She's always been the one keeping it together. Some people just take advantage of good hearts." That one stung more than the rest. Dana had stayed with me during her internship. I'd cooked for her, loaned her money for her first car. And here she was, piling on like I'd vanished into thin air. I scrolled further, hoping it would stop hurting if I saw enough of it. But that's never how these things work. And then, Verena's reply. "Callista gives with grace. Some just calculate. Not everyone's absence is silent." I felt heat rise in my throat. I set my phone down, not gently. That line wasn't passive-aggressive. It was a full-blown accusation wrapped in a velvet ribbon. I stood at the window for a while after that. The clouds hadn't moved. The yard was still bare, just the faint rustle of the neighbor's dog barking at nothing. But in my mind, I wasn't in the kitchen anymore. I was 10. I remembered sitting on the bottom step of the staircase with a coloring book while Callista wailed in the next room. Verena had her in her arms, rocking back and forth, whispering, "She just feels too much. She's special like that." I'd been quiet, always had been. Dad came home early that day, and I showed him the drawing I'd made for him, his favorite armchair, drawn with crayons and crooked lines. He smiled. "Thanks, kiddo," he said. Then he walked straight past me and into the other room to check on Callista. That same night, Verena told me, "You're easy. You don't need as much." That's a good thing. I'd believed her. Over the years, I'd been praised for being low maintenance, for not causing a fuss, for being good. Every time Callista lost a job or broke down over a failed relationship, I was the one who stayed on hold with the insurance company or paid the overdue utility bill, quietly, quickly. But in this story, they were now writing publicly. I was the one who abandoned them. I pulled out my laptop and opened a new document. I titled it, Counter-Narrative. In it, I began to list events, dates, payments, photos, emails, not for posting, not yet, just for my own clarity. I had been erased in front of an audience. And that kind of erasure, when done well, could become permanent unless someone stood up and said, "No, that's not how it happened." My inbox pinged. A new message. I almost deleted it, assuming it was another sale or some newsletter I never unsubscribed from. But the subject caught me. "You don't deserve this." It was from Morgan Sims. I hadn't seen her name in years. We went to high school together. She used to be Callista's best friend until they had a falling out over something neither of them ever talked about. I opened it. "Wendy, I know we haven't talked in forever. I saw that post. I don't know what's going on between you all, and it's not my place, but I just want you to know, Callista used to say the worst things about you behind your back. She used to say you were nothing but a shadow, that you didn't even count as real competition because you didn't fight dirty enough. I'm sorry. I should have said something back then." I read it twice, not because I was shocked, but because it was the first time someone acknowledged that what I'd been feeling all these years wasn't in my head. I responded simply, "Thank you." Then I moved all the screenshots of Callista's post and Verina's comments into a folder I renamed Reclaim. I also added the bank receipts again, and a few photos from the year I repainted their living room by myself. "You don't need to scream when you're gathering matches," I whispered to myself, and I meant it. By the time I'd archived the last screenshot and renamed the folder Reclaim, the daylight outside had quietly slipped away. The street lamps had flickered on without ceremony. From my window, I could see the shadows stretch long across the sidewalk, like they were trying to remind me how far this mess had spread. I needed to get out of my apartment, not far, just somewhere with a little less noise in my head. I grabbed my coat, keys, and drove back to my father's house. I told myself it was to pick up the last of my things, the winter box I'd left in the basement after Thanksgiving. But part of me knew I was hoping, maybe foolishly, that I'd find something else, something that hadn't been touched, erased, or rewritten. The house was quiet when I pulled into the driveway. No lights in the living room. I let myself in with the key I still hadn't returned, stepped over the stack of Amazon boxes Verena always ordered but never opened. The hallway smelled like cinnamon potpourri that had overstayed its welcome. Downstairs, the basement was colder than I remembered. The light switch buzzed before flickering to life. I scanned the boxes, most of them labeled in Verena's cursive. Holiday, dining, linens, master, Callista, high school. Then, tucked behind an old rocking chair, I saw a small cardboard box. No label, just a single strip of masking tape across the top. When I opened it, a soft cloth fell forward. Beneath it was a stack of papers bound by a faded ribbon. The handwriting on the top envelope stopped me cold. Mom's. I sank to the floor and held the letter in both hands like it might vanish if I wasn't careful. The envelope was yellowed but intact. No date on the front, just my name in her gentle, deliberate script. I broke the seal. The letter was dated 6 days before she died. "Wendy, if you're reading this, it means something's brought you back to the basement. This house is yours. You've held it up more than you realize. I hope by now your father's seen it too, but in case he hasn't, I need you to know this in writing. Everything we built knowing you'd be the one to keep it grounded. Not flashy, not loud, but strong. There's a copy of the will enclosed. It names you as the sole heir. We updated it together in 2017, before I got too tired. If anything happens, if it gets lost, don't forget what you've done for this home, this family. You've always been more than enough. Love, Mom." I didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, I reached into the box again and pulled out a thin folder, beige, like the one I'd found earlier. This one was labeled in ink, "Updated Will, signed." I flipped it open, and there it was. My name, line after line, initialed, witnessed, notarized. Not Callista's, mine. It hit me like a tide. I hadn't imagined the warmth between my mother and me. I hadn't invented her belief in me. She'd known. She'd planned. I took the documents upstairs, tucked them under my arm, and drove straight to the office of the estate attorney she used. I remembered his name from a holiday card she'd once left on the fridge. "Richard Halden, thanks for everything." I called from the car. To my surprise, the receptionist remembered my mother. She was a sweet woman, always had lemon drops in her purse. Richard saw me that same afternoon. He was older now, with a slow gait and thick glasses, but kind, the kind that doesn't rush silence. I laid the documents on his desk and waited. He read in silence, nodding occasionally. Finally, he leaned back. "These are real," he said, "legally valid." I exhaled for the first time in what felt like a week. "But," he continued, "your father came in 2 days after your mother passed, said there was a misunderstanding. He asked us to pull all documents temporarily while he sorted things. He never returned." My heart dropped. "So, the original will disappeared." "We archived a digital backup for a few months," Richard said gently. But after no follow-up, it was purged per policy. We sent letters, but none were answered. I felt something snap, not rage, just fracture. They never planned to tell me, I said. I can't speak to that, he replied, sliding the papers back toward me. But this still holds weight, especially if you can prove financial contributions. I can. I left his office and drove home without music. The air outside had turned sharp, clean, like it had just rained, even though it hadn't. At my apartment, I opened the fireproof safe in my closet and gently placed the documents inside. The envelope, the letter, the will. I locked it. Then I sat at my kitchen counter, pulled out a notepad, and wrote 3 words at the top. Reclaim, record, respond. If they'd buried my name, I'd unearth it myself, one fact at a time. After locking away the will and my mother's letter, I made myself a cup of tea. I didn't drink it, just let it sit beside me, cooling slowly as I spread papers across the kitchen counter. When the space ran out, I moved to the floor. I stacked bank statements, printed receipts, maintenance records, every single trace of what I'd paid for over the last 5 years. Mortgage payments, roof repair, plumbing in the spring of 2020, new appliances, property taxes, even the times I'd covered groceries when money was tight. I laid it all out like puzzle pieces. Not to prove something to myself, I already knew. This was for them, for Wendell, for the ones who insisted I had no stake. They said I didn't need anything, I murmured, marking another yellow highlight on a credit card statement. But I gave them everything. It took hours. By the time I looked at the clock, it was past noon. I hadn't eaten, hadn't noticed. I took a photo of the spread on the floor and saved it. Then, I packed the documents into a neat, zippered portfolio and drove back to my father's house. This time, I didn't bother texting ahead. He was sitting in the den, watching a rerun of a fishing show. He didn't look surprised to see me, just slightly inconvenienced. "You come to pick up more stuff?" he asked, not taking his eyes off the screen. "No," I said, setting the portfolio on the coffee table. "I came to talk." He turned the volume down with a sigh. "All right, let's talk." I opened the binder. "These are the payments I've made on this house," I began. 5 years of mortgage, that's 60 months, Dad, plus maintenance, taxes, home insurance. When Callista's car broke down, I covered that too. When the washer went out, remember I paid the Sears guy. He shifted in his seat. "Yeah, I didn't realize it was that much." "I know you didn't." I turned the page, showed him the receipts, the account statements with his address attached to every single payment. "And while I was doing that," I continued, voice steady, "Callista was being named as the sole heir, and you sat by and let it happen." He scratched his chin. "It wasn't like that." "Then how was it?" I asked. "Explain it to me, because from where I'm sitting, I was the one keeping this house from falling apart, and you all made sure I'd never legally own a single brick of it." Verena thought. "I didn't ask what Verena thought," I said, sharper than I meant to. "I'm talking to you, my father, the man who told me we stick together. That family's about showing up." His mouth opened, then closed again. I sat back slightly. "I'm not asking for a thank you. I'm telling you, I'm not invisible, not anymore." He looked down at the folder, then away. "You were always the one we could count on," he said quietly. "You didn't need much. Callista needed everything, I know," I said. "She always has." He nodded, almost reflexively. "I used to believe that too," I said. "That needing less made me stronger. But now I see, it just made it easier for you to ignore me." He didn't argue. I stood, gathering the papers. "This was your chance to say something, to fix it. I'm giving you that chance now, because when this goes further, I won't be quiet about it anymore." I left without waiting for a response. Back at my apartment, I scanned all the documents. I organized them into 2 digital folders, one labeled Legal, the other named Cleanup. Then I opened a new email. Subject: Let's Talk Ownership. 2. Verena.wexler@email.com. Callista.dawn@email.com. Body. Attached. You'll find financial records, property maintenance receipts, and documented proof of my full contributions to the home located at address. No accusations, no threats, just the truth. You both have 72 hours to respond before I take formal next steps. Wendy. I attached the files. Reread the email once, then hit send. I didn't expect a reply, not yet, but I'd given them a choice, one last window before the storm. They didn't reply, not a word, not a line, just silence. It was almost worse than a fight. At least a fight meant someone still had the nerve to speak to you. I waited the full 72 hours I had outlined in the email. Checked my inbox like clockwork. Nothing. On the evening of the third day, I got a text from my father. "Hey, can you come by? We need to talk." There was no signature, no warmth, just those 6 words. I drove over early the next morning. It was cold again, colder than usual for March, the kind of air that bites your fingertips even through gloves. I hadn't slept much, and my head was foggy, but I needed clarity more than comfort. The driveway was already full. Callista's SUV parked behind Verena's sedan. I parked at the curb and took a few extra moments in the car, steadying my breath. Then I walked up the steps I had paid to have repaired. Dad opened the door before I could knock. He didn't smile. Didn't even pretend to. He gestured inside. "Come in." I stepped into the living room and noticed something off right away. My boxes, my winter coats, storage containers, even the box labeled Wendy, documents, were stacked by the front door. I turned to him slowly. "What is this?" Verena walked in from the kitchen, mug in hand, robe tied too neatly. She didn't waste a second. "It's for the best, Wendy. There's too much tension. Your energy isn't good for this house." "My energy?" I repeated. "Is this a spa now? You've been aggressive, demanding," she said, "and your threats, your email, that's not how families handle things." "I stated facts," I said, "and requested a conversation. You threatened legal action." "I said nothing of the sort," I replied, voice even. "I gave you evidence. I asked for acknowledgement." Wendell stepped in now, finally speaking. "It's just gotten too hostile, sweetheart. Maybe some time away." I stared at him. "Are you asking me to leave my home?" Verena chimed in, quick as ever. "Technically, it's not your home. Not legally, not anymore." She walked over to the end table and picked up a manila envelope, handing it to me. Inside was a notice to vacate, signed by both Wendell and Callista. I looked at the dates, at the ink, at the stamp. They'd filed this 2 days ago, the day after I'd sent my email. "You knew," I said, looking at my father. "When you sent that message, you already knew." He rubbed his hands together, not meeting my eyes. "It's not personal, Wendy. Just best for everyone." "You mean Callista?" "She's family too," he said. "I'm family," I snapped. "The daughter who kept your lights on, the one who paid the mortgage while she was playing house on Instagram." Verena scoffed. "You're bitter. That's all this is, and bitterness doesn't entitle you to anything." I wanted to throw something, anything, but instead, I nodded. Slowly. Then I walked past them to the stack of boxes. No one offered to help. Not even a glance. I carried the first 2 loads to my car. The wind stung my face, but I welcomed it. It kept the tears from rising. When I came back for the last box, Callista was standing in the hallway, arms folded. She wore a sweatshirt with the house's zip code on it, probably one of those Etsy knockoffs she liked to post about. "Leaving already?" she said, voice syrupy. "That was faster than I expected." I looked her dead in the eye. "You might have stolen the deed, but you'll never have what built this place." She laughed. "What? Drywall and receipts?" I didn't answer. Just lifted the box and walked past her. Outside, snow had started falling. Light, slow, like it wasn't in a hurry to stay. I dragged my suitcase down the front steps and toward the street. From the corner of my eye, I saw the curtain shift in the front window, Verena watching. Callista, no doubt next to her. Maybe even Wendell in the background. I didn't look back. I opened the Uber app, booked a ride, and waited by the curb. When the car arrived, I loaded my things silently. The driver offered a polite nod. I nodded back. Once we were moving, I pulled out my laptop, opened the encrypted folder, added a new subfolder. Eviction. I took pictures of the notice, the boxes stacked by the door, the signatures. I recorded a quick audio note, my voice steady. Wendy Taylor. March 3rd. Evicted by family from primary residence. All property boxed by others prior to arrival. No discussion permitted. Notice to vacate received. All documentation filed. I paused, then added one more sentence. They've crossed every line. Now I'll redraw the map. It was just after 9 the next morning when I heard the knock at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone, and for a moment I just stared at it, half dressed with a towel still wrapped around my damp hair. The knock came again. Short, sharp. I opened the door slowly. It was Mrs. Harlan from next door. She stood bundled in her quilted coat, her breath puffing out in little clouds. "I thought you should have this," she said, pressing a small USB drive into my palm. "It's from my door camera. I didn't know whether to say anything, but, well, I figured you might want to see for yourself." "Thank you," I said, taking it gently. She gave me a knowing look, one that didn't require explanation, and turned to go. Inside, I plugged the drive into my laptop. It took a few seconds to load. The timestamp read 2 days ago, around 4:45 p.m. The image showed Verena, standing in her pale pink coat, holding the bouquet of hydrangeas I'd left on the front porch beneath the wooden sign that still read, "In loving memory of Marion Taylor." Without hesitation, Verena dropped the flowers into the outdoor trash bin. She didn't look around, she didn't pause, just turned, fixed her scarf, and walked back inside. There was no audio, but there didn't need to be. Mrs. Harlan had renamed the file. "Guess you weren't supposed to see this." She was right. I sat back, staring at the screen, the image frozen on Verena's turned back. I'd given her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she was protecting Callista, maybe she was just trying to keep peace. But this wasn't about protection. This was malice. Quiet, deliberate erasure. I saved the footage in the same encrypted folder. Then I sat still for a long while, not out of sadness, but strategy. By late afternoon, I was clearing out my inbox when a subject line stopped me cold. Tacoma Local, Community Feature Request. I opened it. It wasn't a request, it was a link, and it was already live. The headline read, "Daughter abandons aging father in inheritance dispute." Below it was a heavily edited photo of me dragging my suitcase out of the house, my jaw set, shoulders stiff. A moment caught mid-stride, but framed to look cold, even cruel. The article included quotes from Verena and Callista. "Wendy became increasingly hostile when she didn't get what she wanted," Verena said. "It's been painful watching my husband age while being treated like an obstacle." "Dad's been heartbroken," Callista added. "I've been trying to hold everything together, but she just walked out." No mention of the eviction notice. No mention of the payments. Instead, it painted me as an ungrateful, unstable woman who'd finally snapped. I could feel the blood rush to my ears. Not from embarrassment, rage. I closed the article and immediately drafted an email. I didn't send it to the publication. I sent it to Maya Reed, a legal columnist and podcast host I'd followed for years, someone who had a reputation for digging beneath spin. Subject, correction request, estate fraud story. Body, Ms. Reed, I am the woman featured in the Tacoma Local article published this afternoon. I am attaching verified documents and ring camera footage relevant to the situation described. Please review the evidence. I will speak publicly if necessary, but I believe truth deserves quiet clarity first. Attached. Mortgage and maintenance payments. Legal eviction notice. Footage of destruction of memorial flowers. Will copy dated and signed. Personal letter from Marion Taylor. I hit send. Then I waited. The response came faster than I expected. 43 minutes later. Got it. Reviewing now. The footage is damning. Can I contact you for comment tomorrow morning? I replied. Of course. Then, I closed my laptop. That night, I didn't scroll, didn't check comments, but just before bed, I whispered to the quiet room. They broadcasted lies. I submitted facts. And I slept. The next morning, before the kettle finished boiling, my phone vibrated. A notification. Footage received. Story pending validation. I didn't smile. I didn't jump up and down. I just typed one line in response. Let me know when truth becomes louder than noise. By the time I stepped into the courthouse lobby that morning, the cold had already melted off my skin, but not from the spring sun. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't even angry. I was focused, like someone who's been rehearsing the truth so long it had started to sound like math. Maya Reed had run the article, front page of her column, digital and print. The headline didn't yell, it just stated, "When the caregiver is the discarded one." The video clip of Verena tossing my mother's flowers went viral within hours. I didn't read the comments. That part was for the public. This was for the court. I met my lawyer Claire at the elevator. She was calm, no makeup, navy blue suit that meant business. She carried the evidence folder like it weighed more than it did. Inside the courtroom, Callista sat flanked by Verena and Wendell. Callista looked smug in her cream blouse and overly polished flats. Verena, by contrast, wore her sadness like stage makeup. Eyeliner slightly smeared, cardigan clasped at the throat. Wendell stared ahead like someone waiting for a bus. The judge, an older woman named Morton, looked over the stack of files. Her voice didn't need to raise. Claire stood. She started with the basics. Your Honor, this is a case of deliberate inheritance suppression. My client, Wendy Taylor, has provided 5 years of payment records for the mortgage, repairs, taxes, and general upkeep of the property in question. She placed copies on the clerk's desk. Additionally, she continued, we present a notarized letter and signed will from Marion Taylor, the deceased spouse of Mr. Wendell Taylor, naming Wendy Taylor as sole heir to the estate. She paused. And finally, video footage demonstrating Verena Wexler discarding a memorial left by my client in honor of her late mother. Murmurs in the courtroom were hushed quickly by Judge Morton. Verena's lawyer stammered through a weak rebuttal. Something about emotional strain and intent to share eventually. The judge raised a hand. Intent does not override action. She turned to Callista. Do you have any documented financial contribution to the property? Callista blinked. I helped clean. Judge Morton didn't flinch. That's not legally recognized. What is recognized is a notice to vacate signed by you and Mr. Taylor, delivered to the individual who paid to keep the house livable for half a decade. She let the words hang. Then, with a tone that could have split stone, she declared, This court finds in favor of Wendy Taylor. The estate will be transferred accordingly. Ms. Taylor is now the legal heir and primary executor of all properties and assets tied to this address. Callista's mouth parted, Verena gasped, and Wendell, he just bowed his head slightly. Outside the courtroom, the air was lighter. Claire shook my hand and said, You did it with dignity. I nodded. Let's go finish it. The next morning, I stood at the old kitchen counter of my childhood home, laptop open, printer humming quietly behind me. 3 letters, 3 names. Verena Wexler, Callista, Dawn Wexler, Wendell Taylor. Each envelope sealed and placed in their respective mailboxes. 30 days. That's what I gave them, a full, fair legal timeline. I wasn't here for revenge. I was here to reclaim what had always been mine. I didn't watch them read the notices. I didn't need to. 2 weeks later, Callista was the first to leave. I heard her car rumble out of the driveway at dawn. She didn't knock, didn't send a message. Verena left next, a small U-Haul, no eye contact, no apologies. Wendell lingered. 3 days past his deadline, I found him in the garage, staring at an old fishing rod. I used to take you out to Point Defiance, he said softly. You did. You always brought trail mix, no raisins. I nodded. You always hated raisins. He looked at me. I never wanted it to end like this. It didn't have to, I replied. He left that night. And then I walked back into the house, alone. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of breath I'd held for years. The living room still had that faint scent of lavender, the one my mother used to keep in drawer sachets. I stood in the middle of the room, palms open at my sides. "This was always mine," I whispered to the air, to the walls, to the memory of the woman who knew it long before I did. They just borrowed it. The house was mine again. Legally, officially, on paper, and in deed, it bore my name alone now. But a piece of paper, no matter how final, doesn't sweep away the ghosts. It doesn't dissolve the echoes. It doesn't heal what was hollowed out. I remember the morning after Wendell's truck vanished down the street. No goodbye, no scribbled note left on the counter, just silence. The kind of silence that settles over things after a storm has stripped everything bare. I sat on the front steps with a chipped mug of tea clutched in my hands. The steam rose and twisted in the chill air as I watched the light slowly stretch across the cracked driveway. A quiet filled the space, but it wasn't peace. It wasn't the tense, uneasy quiet we'd lived in when shouting always felt just one wrong glance away. But it wasn't serenity either. It was the kind of quiet that settles after someone slams the door for the last time. A vacuum, not a bomb. I stood up eventually and stepped inside, barefoot. The floorboards creaked beneath me, familiar in their protest, like they recognized me, like they remembered the girl who used to tiptoe through these halls trying not to wake anyone. The living room was stripped clean, just as I'd left it after the movers came. The final chair Verena had insisted was hers was gone. She said it like she earned it, like I hadn't paid for it, like it was hers by virtue of louder claims. Sunlight slanted through the dusty bay window. And that's when it happened. I heard my mother. Not in sound exactly, but in sensation. A memory so vivid it felt like presence. Her laughter, soft and sudden, the way it used to catch me off guard. Her humming while folding towels. The shuffle of her worn slippers gliding across linoleum before school. She was in the walls somehow, in the corners and creaks. Each room still held a version of her, and strangely, a version of me. Not the woman I had become trying to survive Wendell or navigate Verena's moods, but the version of me before all that, before I learned to quiet myself in order to keep things calm. I climbed the stairs slowly, hand trailing along the worn banister. I opened the door to what used to be her sewing room. The fabric scraps were long gone, but the scent lingered, lavender and starch. In the back of the closet, I found a shoebox, wedged deep behind a sagging stack of old linens. Inside were 6 letters, each carefully folded and bound with a lilac ribbon, every one of them addressed to me. The first bore my full name in her looping script, Wendy Lynn Taylor. I sat down on the hardwood floor, cross-legged like a child, and unfolded the letter slowly. Wendy, if you're reading this, it means you've made it here on your own. Far enough to need to hear what I never managed to say when I was still around. You were always steady, quiet, not the loudest in the room, not the one who demanded attention, but you held everything together. You were the glue. And I should have said it while I had the chance. I should have told you how proud I was. Love, Mom. My hands trembled as I read it. Her voice, her words, each one a thread sewing me back together. I read all 6 letters. They were dated around major moments, after my college graduation, after her diagnosis, after what would be her final Christmas. She must have written them with the intention of giving them to me when the time felt right. But she never did. Instead, they waited in the dark, sealed in a box, for years. I took them out into the backyard later that afternoon, the same yard she once filled with lavender and zinnias. Now it was bare, the beds unkempt, soil hardened by winter's touch. I laid out an old quilt and read the letters again, this time out loud, as though she were sitting beside me in the sun. The tears didn't come right away. They waited until the final letter, the one she wrote without knowing it would be the last. That night, with the letters folded again and tucked safely into my bedside drawer, I wrote one of my own. It wasn't long, but it was honest. Dear Wendell, I am no longer your daughter, not out of hatred and not to cause harm, but because I cannot keep showing up in places where I am unseen. This house knows me. I know me. I hope you find peace. But I won't wait for it with you. Wendy. At dawn, I walked to the post office, slipped it into the blue metal box with trembling fingers, and exhaled. Then I walked home and opened every single window. And the air poured in, cool, cedar-scented, clean. I let it sweep through the rooms, through the corners where resentment used to crouch. In the days and weeks that followed, I began to reclaim things. I scrubbed the storage rooms clean, patched up the drywall, repainted the hallway. The pink that Verena once insisted on. Gone. I rolled on a soft gray instead, just like it used to be, like home used to feel. I enrolled in a real estate course, finally chasing down a dream I'd shelved for others' needs. I even started sketching plans to convert the basement into a small apartment. Something affordable, something stable. A place for single moms who were trying to start over, just like I was. It was quiet work, healing work. Not because I'd won some invisible battle, but because I'd finally stopped vanishing from my own life. No one came back. Verena didn't call. Callista never checked in. And Wendell. Last I heard, he moved in with a cousin up in Oregon, where the winters are mild and no one knew his daughter's name. But that was okay, because closure doesn't always come with apologies. Sometimes it comes in the absence of noise. Sometimes it's the silence that says everything. And this house, this home, wasn't haunted anymore. It was filled with breath, with lavender sprigs on windowsills, with warmth, with light. The past didn't disappear. The scars didn't vanish, but they didn't define me either. They reminded me of what I'd come through. And the keys? They still fit in my hand. Only now, they opened a door to something new, to something that was mine, truly mine. Sometimes, the deepest betrayal doesn't come from strangers. It comes from the people who said they'd always love you. Wendy's story isn't just about inheritance. It's about boundaries, recognition, and the cost of being the one who never asked for much. So let me ask you, have you ever been treated like the backup plan in your own family? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story hit close to home, don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories that speak the truth. We're often too afraid to say out loud. Hi, my name's Naraya. Just hours before the biggest dance competition of my life, my sister went into my room, unzipped my garment bag, and cut my dress into pieces. And when I walked onto that stage anyway, wearing the backup dress she didn't know existed, she turned pale. But the truth is, that dress wasn't the only thing she tried to destroy. What kind of sister does something like that? And what kind of mother watches it happen and still says nothing? They smiled at me during breakfast, while hiding scissors behind their backs. Do you ever wonder what happens when the quiet one stops shrinking and finally steps into the light? When I pulled into the driveway, the sun was barely hanging on above the hills. The adobe walls of the house looked the same, but something in me knew the warmth inside wouldn't match the color of the clay. I sat in the car for a moment longer than I needed to, hands resting on the steering wheel. No one had come out, not even a glance through the window. I opened the trunk, lifted out my duffel, and the garment bag I'd carried like it was glass. The moment I stepped into the front door, the scent hit me first. Velma's usual lavender spray and overcooked chicken. Familiar, but not welcoming. She didn't look up from her phone when I walked into the kitchen. "Oh, you're here," she muttered. I stood there holding my bags while she scrolled. Delphine was already perched at the island counter, with a glass of wine in hand, dressed like she was waiting for a photo op. Her blouse crisp, hair curled, nails done in that soft gray she always said looked executive. "I thought you were arriving tomorrow," she said with a smirk, not even making eye contact. "I told you I was driving in tonight after rehearsal," I replied. My voice came out even, but tight. Velma's eyes finally flicked up from her screen. "Did you stop for dinner, or should I fix you something? There's still some of Delphine's lemon chicken in the fridge." "I'm good, thanks." I took a seat at the end of the table. Not the one where I used to sit. That one was now stacked with Velma's mail and some real estate brochures. There wasn't a single place set for me. Delphine swirled her glass. Big day tomorrow, huh? Dancing in front of all those judges. Nerve-wracking. It's not the first time, I said, and unzipped my bag quietly. You never told me what the competition was for, Velma cut in, stirring sugar into her tea. Is it just a local event? It's statewide, I answered. Top school reps from across New Mexico. Winner gets a shot at the fellowship in Seattle? She blinked. Oh, I thought Delphine said it was some recital. Delphine smiled. Mom probably misunderstood. I didn't want to get anyone's hopes up. That hit harder than anything else could have. I let it slide. You learn after a while that arguing with people who already made up their minds is like shouting into wind. Velma stood up, walked over to the fridge, and opened it as if I'd said nothing at all. Anyway, we've had a busy day here. Delphine just got promoted. She's now managing 3 entire regions. Isn't that something? I turned my head slightly, enough to catch Delphine's little head tilt, the kind she gives when she knows she's won. Congratulations, I said. It tasted like rust in my mouth. You didn't tell us much about your little dance thing, Velma added, pouring herself another cup. Is there even an audience? Yes, I said. A panel and a full auditorium. Delphine chuckled. Guess we'll see if all that pirouetting paid off. I stood up. I think I'll go unpack. Velma didn't protest. Delphine just tapped her nails on the rim of her glass and went back to reading something on her phone. I walked the same hallway I used to run through as a kid. The house hadn't changed much. The photos on the wall remained exactly where they were, except now, in the newer frames, I wasn't in most of them. Delphine in graduation robes. Delphine at company galas. Delphine with Velma at wine tastings in Santa Fe. My room was cleaner than I remembered, sterile, almost, like no one really expected me to come back. The comforter was neatly folded, and the air smelled like dust and lavender linen spray. A single framed photo sat on the dresser, me, Delphine, and Dad. But I remembered something about that photo that most people wouldn't notice. Velma had once cropped me out when she posted it on Facebook, said the focus was bad on the left side. I sat down on the edge of the bed, placed the garment bag carefully across the mattress, and let my shoulders drop for the first time since I'd gotten in the car that morning. From the kitchen, I could still hear the faint sound of Delphine's laugh. It used to be a lovely sound. Now it cut like a slow blade. I leaned back and stared at the ceiling fan that spun lazily, never fast enough to do anything but make noise. There was a time I used to think coming home meant being seen. That maybe, if I worked hard enough, they'd eventually notice. That if I stitched enough dresses, hit enough perfect turns, earned enough trophies, they'd say, "You matter, you did that." But the silence always answers louder. No one asked about the dress I designed. No one cared that tomorrow was the biggest performance of my life. No one even noticed the callus on my right heel had cracked open from rehearsal. I looked toward the closet. The bag was still there, sealed, quiet, patient. I hadn't told anyone about the second dress, the one they couldn't touch. Not even Delphine. I stood up and walked toward it. I flicked on the bedside lamp, letting the soft light wash across the room. The closet door creaked a little as I opened it. I moved slowly, not out of hesitation, but because what was inside didn't deserve to be rushed. Tucked behind a box of old shoes and a winter coat I hadn't worn in years, the garment bag waited. I pulled it free, careful not to snag the delicate zipper. It felt heavier than I remembered. Maybe it was the beads, or maybe it was everything I'd sewn into it that didn't come from a spool. Before I could unzip it, there was a knock. 3 polite taps. I froze. Delphine didn't wait for permission. She pushed the door open like it was her house, and I was just someone borrowing space. "You still awake?" she asked, stepping inside. I forced a smile and nodded once. "Couldn't sleep yet." Her eyes drifted toward the garment bag in my hand, but she said nothing about it. Instead, she made herself comfortable, sitting at the edge of the bed like we used to when we were teenagers, gossiping about boys we'd never kiss and teachers we couldn't stand. But this wasn't that. This was a chess move. Nervous? She asked, picking up my perfume bottle from the nightstand and turning it over in her hand. Big crowd tomorrow, right? I tilted my head slightly. You know there is. She nodded, uncapping the bottle and sniffing it like it belonged to her. You're brave, I'll give you that. Getting on stage in a homemade dress? Not sure I could ever. Her tone dripped with syrup, but I'd lived under that drizzle long enough to taste the poison underneath. I guess it takes someone who doesn't scare easy, I replied, meeting her eyes. She smiled wide, too wide. That's one way to spin it. There was a pause, the kind that stretches just enough to let meaning settle between the walls. You didn't bring your dress out earlier, she added, setting the perfume down with a soft thud. Hope it still fits. Would be a shame if it didn't. I didn't flinch. It fits fine. She stood and adjusted her blouse in the mirror. Good. I mean, it's not about winning, right? It's about showing up. Another pause. I should let you rest, she added. Wouldn't want you to mess up your big shot. She walked to the door, but turned before leaving. Sleep tight. When the door closed behind her, I didn't move for a minute. I let the silence press in from all sides. Then I unzipped the garment bag. The backup dress was everything the first one wasn't. Midnight blue, floor-length, sleeveless, with a sharp neckline that held its own. Every crystal had been hand-sewn, by me, over months of lunch breaks and after midnight moments. I hadn't told anyone, not even Lorelei. People thought strength looked loud. But I'd learned that real strength looked like preparation. Looked like knowing someone might hurt you, and choosing to be ready anyway. I held the dress up to my body, then walked toward the mirror. The light caught the crystals along the side panels and made them shimmer like stars. A breath caught in my chest, but it wasn't fear, it was confirmation. Inside the lining, near the hem, I'd stitched a quote from Dad. His handwriting, from an old card he gave me the year before he passed. Don't shine to be seen. Shine so others see what's possible. I touched the words with the tip of my finger and nodded once. In the hallway, the floor creaked faintly. I knew that sound. Someone walking slowly, pausing every few steps. I didn't go to the door. I didn't call out. Let her walk. Let her listen. I hung the dress back up and turned off the light. Later, lying in bed with my eyes open in the dark, I stared at the ceiling fan again. It turned lazily, like it always had. But this time, I didn't feel like I was waiting for anything. I'd already made my move. Tomorrow wasn't about convincing anyone. It wasn't about proving anything to Delphine or to Velma. It was about walking onto that stage in a dress no one could ruin, in a version of myself no one had prepared for. And when I stepped into that light, I'd finally see what it looked like to take up space without asking for permission. The early light filtered through the blinds, casting pale stripes across the floor. I lay still for a few more seconds, listening. No footsteps, no doors. The usual creak of Velma's coffee routine was missing, and the air had that heavy quiet only found in a house where something had already gone wrong. I sat up, reached for the water on my nightstand, and took a long sip. My throat was dry like I hadn't spoken in days, though I'd barely said a word last night. I glanced toward the closet, where the backup dress still hung, zipped, untouched. But that wasn't the one I reached for. Habit took me toward the garment bag I'd brought from Albuquerque, the one I'd worked on with every ounce of care I had. Ivory satin, lace accents, pearl-threaded sleeves. I knew every stitch like I knew the lines on my palms. I wanted one last look at it before I walked into the fire. I unzipped the bag, and for a few seconds, my brain didn't register what I was seeing. Like it refused. The sleeves were in pieces, clean slashes through the bodice, beads scattered across the bottom like broken teeth. My hands shook, fingertips grazing the ruined fabric. It hadn't snagged. This wasn't an accident. This was someone's decision. I backed away slowly and sat on the edge of the bed. Breathe, Naraya. Don't break now. The weight of the moment wrapped around my chest like something physical. I looked down at the dress again, now a heap of betrayal and cruelty. Whoever had done it hadn't just cut fabric. They'd taken time. They'd planned. And they made sure it was destroyed in a way that couldn't be fixed. I didn't need to ask who. I didn't even need proof. Delphine had always preferred precision over chaos. If she was going to hit me, she'd make sure it landed where it would hurt the most. Quiet, targeted, and irreversible. The last time I felt this way, I was 16. It was the morning of my conservatory audition, one that could have changed my entire path. Velma was supposed to drive me, but an hour before we left, Delphine came down with a mysterious fever. Pale, flushed, groaning like her insides were falling apart. Velma panicked. "I can't leave her like this, baby. She needs me right now. We'll reschedule your thing." I tried to speak, to argue, but I was already losing. "We'll explain it," she said. "They'll understand." They didn't. No reschedule, no callback. Delphine was fine by dinner, ate an entire bowl of chicken soup and asked for seconds. I knew what that had been, but when I told Velma, just hinted that maybe Delphine hadn't been that sick, I got the lecture. "She's your sister," she snapped. "Why would you accuse her of something so ugly?" That night I cried into my pillow, not because I lost an audition, but because I realized something more dangerous. I was alone in a house where someone could lie and win, and no one would ever believe me. And now, 10 years later, the same script played out. Only this time, I wasn't the same girl. I stood up and closed the garment bag. My hands were steadier now, my breath slower. I turned to the other side of the closet and pulled out the second bag, the one Delphine didn't know existed. It felt like silk and armor all at once. I unzipped it slowly. Midnight blue, deep and bold, the hem kissed with crystal detail. It was everything I wasn't allowed to be in this house. Loud, visible, undeniable. I laid it out across the bed. Light from the window caught on the stones and sent tiny sparks across the room. It didn't look like a plan. It looked like a declaration. I remembered sitting on my apartment floor months ago, cutting the first panel, telling myself I was being paranoid, that no one would dare sabotage me again. But something in me had known. Something had whispered, "Be ready." I wasn't crying. Not because I wasn't hurt, but because hurt didn't matter right now. What mattered was that I'd prepared for her cruelty. What mattered was that she had to try this hard to stop me, and still, I would go on. I stepped back, looked at the backup dress in full, and whispered to the air, to the past, to myself. Not this time. I folded it carefully and placed it back into its bag, zipped it slowly. I didn't slam drawers or stomp down the hall. I didn't need to. I had already won more than she knew. By the time I came downstairs, the air smelled like burnt syrup and overcompensating. Velma was in the kitchen, wearing her company robe, the one with the satin trim and initials embroidered near the collar, flipping pancakes with all the enthusiasm of someone hosting a brunch for people she hoped would forget the things she'd said behind their backs. Delphine was already seated, sipping coffee from the mug I used to consider mine. She smiled when she saw me, that sugar-coated look she reserved for when strangers were watching. Except no one was. "Morning," she said. "Sleep okay?" I nodded, pulling out a chair at the far end of the table. The tension in the room didn't hum. It draped. I could feel it in the way Velma's back stiffened when she turned to glance at me, spatula in hand. "Hope you're hungry," Velma said. "Delphine helped with the batter." "I stirred twice," Delphine added with a chuckle. Velma placed a plate in front of me. 2 uneven pancakes, one already hardening at the edge. It wasn't about food, it never was. Delphine set her cup down gently. "Rough morning?" I met her eyes and held the gaze long enough to watch the corners of her smile twitch. "Not really," I said. "Just focused." She tilted her head, faux concern painted on. "Don't let little things ruin your day." Little things, like the dress she'd butchered, like the hours I'd lost remaking what should have been celebrated. Velma sat down across from me. "We'll be there tonight, of course. Wouldn't miss it." Of course. Now that it was too late for their absence to sting, they'd be visible. Great, I said. Thanks. Delphine reached for the butter. It's impressive, really. I mean, going out there after everything. I don't think I'd have the guts. I picked up my fork slowly. Not everyone folds when things fall apart. The room fell into a soft hush. Velma stirred her coffee like she needed the noise. Did you bring the dress down yet? She asked, eyes on the cup. No, I said. I've got it covered. Delphine smirked. Hope it still fits. Things can change overnight. I stood, quietly, intentionally. I'm going to take a breath outside. I didn't wait for a response. The air on the porch was cooler than I expected. Dry, honest. A few birds flitted between the trees across the yard. I heard the door creak behind me. Delphine stepped out, closing it behind her like we were about to share a secret. She joined me at the railing, leaning on her forearms. You're not mad, are you? I looked at her, really looked. No, I said. Good, because it would be a shame if today became about drama. She laughed lightly, but it didn't reach her eyes. I didn't respond. She kept going. You know, when I was your age, I auditioned for a program in New York, a conservatory. I didn't tell anyone. I figured if I didn't get in, I could pretend it never happened. I watched her carefully. I didn't get in, she said flatly. They said I lacked presence, that I didn't command the room. It stuck with me. I nodded once. And you never told Mom. She laughed again. Hollow. God, no. She would have had a field day. Back then, anything outside of corporate success was just a hobby. Remember when she said my poetry sounded like fortune cookie filler? She told me dance was cute, like baton twirling. We stood in silence. Then she added, I just didn't think you'd actually go through with it, get this far. There it was, the truth she hadn't meant to say out loud. I stepped back, giving her space. You broke it on purpose, I said. Her face froze. You thought if I didn't have the dress, I'd fall apart, that I'd get scared, that I'd turn into you. She opened her mouth, but no words came. I kept my tone even. You think if I shine, it dims you, but it doesn't. It just shows what you gave up. Her shoulders twitched, just slightly, but she said nothing. I walked back inside, the screen door groaning behind me. Velma was still at the table, phone in hand, pretending not to listen. I passed her without a word, went upstairs, and shut the door behind me. The clock read 7:42. Call time was in 2 hours. I didn't need their applause. I didn't need their belief. I just needed to finish what I started. The ride to the Performing Arts Center took less than 15 minutes, but I felt every second stretch out like thread pulled too tight. Lorelei drove. We didn't talk much. She glanced at me a few times, but didn't ask questions. That's why I trusted her. She didn't need to hear it to know it had happened. The building came into view, beige stucco, trimmed with brown ironwork, the front steps already buzzing with dancers in warm-up gear, and chaperones holding coffee like lifelines. I closed my eyes for a moment as we pulled into the lot. Inside, the air was different. Controlled, purposeful. The scent of hairspray, floor polish, and nerves. A staff member handed us badges at check-in, and Lorelei guided me to the dressing area. I hadn't said a word since we left the house, but when we got to the mirror-lined room, she set down my bag and turned to me. You sure you're good? I met her gaze in the reflection. I've been good since the minute she decided to cut it. She nodded once and unzipped the garment bag. I stepped out of my jacket and stood still while she helped me into the midnight blue dress. The fabric settled against me like it had been waiting all its life for this day. Zip, she said, fingers working carefully. You made this? Every stitch. She let out a low whistle. If they don't see it, they're blind. The room filled quickly. Dancers warmed up. Music echoed faintly from a nearby practice hall. Some girls laughed too loudly. A few gave me those glances that weren't cruel, just calculating, trying to place me. I didn't bother returning them. The moment the coordinator called our numbers for lineup, the noise dropped. We filed out and stood backstage. I was 12th. My name pinned to my hip. The music from contestant 11 thumped faintly under the floorboards. I flexed my toes inside my shoes and focused on breathing. "Number 12, you're up," someone called. The lights went down. I stepped into the wings, and then onto the stage. The spotlight didn't blind me, it just felt honest, like this was where truth lived. I walked to center stage, not rushed, not theatrical, just full and calm. The piano intro began. My body moved before my thoughts did, years of training pulling me forward. I didn't count beats. I didn't chase choreography. I told a story in motion, and not one person in the audience knew it was about betrayal. I let the pauses linger. I let my breath show. I didn't perform for approval. I embodied what it looked like when a woman has been counted out and comes anyway. At one point, in a still pose between movements, I saw her, back row. Delphine, arms crossed, stone-faced, and beside her, Velma, with her lips slightly parted, holding her purse like it might defend her. I finished the routine in silence. My hand over my heart, head tilted back, eyes open. Applause erupted before the music had even faded. I walked to the edge of the stage and gave a small bow, not for them, but for me, for every hour of training, for every time I sewed in secret, for every piece of myself I'd stitched back together. I exited the stage and met Lorelei backstage. "You leveled the room," she said, her voice low. "I don't know if they're ready for what comes next." We waited in the green room as scores were tallied. Chatter buzzed around me. Compliments, speculation. I sat quietly, sipping water from a paper cup, watching the clock. Then the head judge stepped up to the mic. "Before we announce the top placements," he said, "we want to take a moment to recognize something extraordinary." My stomach twisted, but I stayed still. There was a competitor who not only performed with grace and power, but also designed and constructed her own costume, fully original, from scratch. He paused. Then, "Contestant number 12, would you mind stepping forward?" I stood. My knees didn't shake. I walked to the front of the stage, felt the spotlight again. He leaned toward the mic. "This dress, who made it?" I didn't hesitate. "I did!" The room erupted. Applause, louder than before. Some people stood. I saw faces I didn't recognize smiling, clapping, and in the far corner, I saw Delphine. Not smiling, not clapping, frozen. Velma turned toward her. Her hand twitched. Her phone slipped from her grip and hit the floor with a soft thud. And I stood there, not needing their reaction to validate what I already knew. I hadn't just danced, I had declared. The applause was still ringing in my ears as I walked off stage, but I wasn't holding on to it. I'd said what I came to say, through every movement, every breath, every ounce of fabric I'd built myself. Let them keep clapping. I had already stepped beyond the noise. Backstage, Lorelei met me with wide eyes and a proud nod. "You nailed it," she whispered, squeezing my arm. "But I need to do something now. Trust me." She pulled a small flash drive from her jacket pocket, silver, plain, silent, and turned down the hallway that led toward the judge's lounge. I didn't ask. I already knew. While I waited in the green room, a quiet buzz began to ripple through the corridor. People moved faster. A couple of assistants from the staff passed by, whispering with their heads close. No one said my name, but a few glanced in my direction with curiosity. I stayed seated, legs crossed, hands folded over my knee. Lorelei was gone maybe 15 minutes. When she returned, she didn't say a word, just sat beside me with a soft exhale like she'd been holding her breath the entire time. Down the hall, the judging panel had gathered in a separate room to finalize the scores. One of the organizers stepped out to fetch someone. His eyes found me. "Miss Warner," he said gently, "would you mind coming with me?" I nodded and stood. Lorelei didn't move, but I felt her eyes follow me the whole way. The lounge was colder than the stage had been. It smelled like overbrewed coffee and air freshener trying too hard. A long table stretched down the middle of the room, covered in clipboards, ballots, a half-eaten croissant. Judge Ramirez looked up from a tablet as I entered. He didn't smile. Behind him, the screen on the wall was paused at a still frame that turned my stomach. Delphine's back, facing the camera. My bedroom door slightly ajar behind her. Her hands holding the ivory dress, the one I'd sewn over 7 weeks of exhaustion and hope. "Do you recognize this?" he asked quietly. I nodded. "Your friend brought us the footage," he continued. "Security cameras in the hallway outside your room captured her entering late last night. Then we received this." He pressed play. On screen, Delphine moved with eerie calm. She unfolded the dress, laid it across the bed, checked over her shoulder, then reached into her purse and pulled out a pair of scissors. I watched her slice through the fabric like she was trimming paper. One cut across the neckline, another through the lace at the shoulder. She didn't rush. She folded the dress neatly afterward, tucked it back into the garment bag like it had never happened. When the video stopped, I looked down at the floor. "Do you want to press charges?" Ramirez asked. His tone wasn't forceful, just factual. Before I could answer, the door opened again. Velma. She looked confused at first, as though someone had called her in for the wrong reason. She straightened her blouse, smiled politely at the panel, then turned to me. "What's going on?" she asked. No one answered her. Judge Ramirez gestured to the screen. "You should see this." He played it again. This time I didn't watch the screen. I watched my mother. Her expression shifted almost instantly, from confusion to disbelief to something too cold to name. Her mouth parted. Her hand slowly lifted to cover it. "No," she said under her breath. "She wouldn't. She wouldn't." But the footage was still rolling. "She did," I said. Velma blinked at me, speechless. I didn't shout. I didn't ask her why she was shocked. I didn't need her to speak at all. What I needed had already been said. They offered me the choice again. "We can pursue formal consequences. This falls under sabotage of property and competitive misconduct. The school and state board will support your claim." I took a long breath. Then quietly, "Not today." They blinked, surprised. "I didn't come here to ruin her," I said. "I came to prove she couldn't ruin me." Velma was still rooted in place, eyes red and full of something she'd never shown me before. Helplessness. "I need some air," I added. I walked past them, out the door, down the hall, and into the sunlight. Outside, the courtyard was quiet. A few contestants sat under trees with sandwiches or phones, lost in their own victories or failures. I sat on a bench near the far edge and tilted my face toward the sky. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the weight of trying to be understood. I just felt done. Not defeated, not numb, just done needing anyone to give me permission to feel proud of myself. And that, in itself, was a kind of peace I hadn't known I was allowed to want. The buzz started as a low murmur, someone saying my name, another whisper about that video. I didn't move at first. I stayed seated at the edge of the courtyard, soaking in those final minutes of peace before everything else shifted. The air had changed. Not the temperature, but the feel of it, like the truth was already working its way through the walls. A voice crackled from the loudspeakers inside the building, calm, official, just loud enough to carry through the halls and out to where I sat. "For the integrity of competition and transparency with all participants," it began, "we will now display footage related to a misconduct investigation. This will be broadcast throughout the main lobby and common areas." I stood slowly. When I stepped back into the building, people had already gathered. Some stood frozen mid-step. Others had their phones out, filming the screen. I didn't need to ask what they were seeing. The video played in silence. No music, no commentary. Just the image of Delphine in my room, her face half in shadow. Her hands opening my garment bag. Her posture calm, efficient. The scissors gleamed for a moment before she brought them down across the neckline of the dress. There was an audible gasp. Someone near me whispered, "Oh my God, that's her sister." I kept walking, past the stairs, past the whispers. I didn't flinch. My heels clicked softly on the tile as I made my way to the center of the crowd. Velma stood near the refreshments table, one hand clamped over her mouth, the other clinging to her purse strap. Her eyes stayed locked on the screen, even as people turned toward her. She looked like someone watching a slow car crash, unable to move, unable to look away. The video ended. No one clapped, no one spoke. Just that heavy, breathless pause where shame lives. And then Delphine emerged. She came around the corner from the east corridor, clearly unaware of what had just happened. But the moment she stepped into the lobby and saw the way everyone had pivoted toward her, saw the paused screen still frozen on her holding the scissors, her face dropped. "Wait, what is this?" she said, blinking fast. No one answered. She took a step forward, then two. Her arms were stiff at her sides, her mouth parted like she wanted to explain but didn't know how. Velma turned toward her daughter. "Delphine," she started, but stopped herself. Delphine's eyes scanned the room and finally landed on me. "Why would you show that?" she asked, her voice sharp, unsteady. You could have just come to me. We could have talked." I said nothing. "You made me look like a monster," she said louder now. "This isn't how families handle things." Lorelei stepped beside me and whispered, "She still thinks you did this to her." Delphine's face went pale when another voice broke through the crowd. "Is it true?" Harlan. He stood near the front entrance, his hands tucked into the pockets of his jacket. His tone was even, but low enough that silence fell around him instantly. She turned toward him like someone reaching for a lifeline. "Baby, come on, you know me. You know I'd never—" "I knew who you pretended to be," he said, stepping closer. "But this was intentional. You planned to humiliate your own sister, on her biggest day." Delphine opened her mouth, closed it. She took a step toward him, but he raised a hand. "I'm done defending you," he said. She stopped moving. "You always said people didn't give you enough credit," he continued. "Maybe they gave you too much." Then, without another word, he turned and walked out. The sound of the glass doors swinging shut echoed louder than the video had. Delphine didn't follow. She stood there, the crowd parting just enough to leave her alone at the center. Her dress was still perfect, her makeup untouched. But nothing about her looked composed anymore. Her voice, her posture, her presence, all of it unraveled in the quiet. Velma didn't go to her, and I certainly didn't. Someone behind me murmured, "How do you even recover from something like that?" I didn't answer. I just let their question hang in the air. Instead, I turned toward the stage doors, where one of the coordinators had reappeared, headset on, scanning the crowd. "Nariah Warner," she called. "Top honors. Please report to the stage." I didn't walk toward Delphine. I walked forward, toward the light, where my name finally belonged. The stage lights dimmed as I stepped down the side ramp, escorted by a soft-spoken volunteer with a clipboard and a kind smile. She congratulated me, quietly, before vanishing into the backstage swirl of tech crew and clipboards and whispered calls. I walked alone through the hallway, still half lit by afternoon sun through the skylights above. I could hear the auditorium's applause fading behind me, muffled but real. This wasn't about clapping anymore. Someone tried to stop me outside the green room, asked for a photo, a quick interview. I shook my head gently. "Maybe later," I said. "Not now." I kept walking until the hallway turned left and opened into the back corridor of the venue, near the emergency exit that led out to a small stone terrace. I needed air. Not fresh exactly, just unfiltered. The gold in the sky had begun to deepen, brushing everything in amber and hush. I leaned against the railing and closed my eyes for a second. Not out of exhaustion, but to let the quiet stretch. No talking, no questions. Just me, the fading day, and the sound of my own breathing. My fingers drifted toward my waist, where the inside lining of the dress brushed against my ribs. I reached under gently and touched the soft patch I'd sewn into the inside months ago. It wasn't large, just enough for 2 stitched words from the letter Dad had left me before he passed. Shine quietly. I used to think strength had to announce itself. Now I knew better. I didn't cry, didn't even blink hard. I just stood still and let the fabric ground me, the way only something made with full intention can. Voices echoed down the hallway behind me. Not angry, just active. People re-entering the building, families calling out to one another, plans being made for dinner. And then I heard my name again, but softer this time. I turned slightly to see Delphine standing 10 feet away, just inside the corridor, one hand on the frame of the open door. She didn't speak, just looked at me, eyes red-rimmed, expression unreadable. We stared at each other for maybe 4-5 seconds. Her posture was stiff. Her lips parted like she might say something. An apology, a justification, anything. But I didn't wait. I turned back toward the railing. My message had already been delivered. Not in words, but in action. I had no interest in dragging her through the shame she'd already created for herself. That wasn't the lesson. It never was. She didn't follow, and I didn't look back. When I re-entered the building, most of the crowd had dispersed. A few dancers were still hugging family. Some parents took photos of their kids holding plaques. The tension in the air had thinned, like a thunderstorm that had passed without leaving rain. Velma stood near the lobby exit, phone in hand, staring down at her screen like she was willing it to offer some script for what to say next. I walked right past her, but she reached out, just a small movement, fingertips brushing the sleeve of my dress. "Naraya," she said. Not sharp, not forceful, just my name. I stopped but didn't face her. "I'm proud of you," she added. Soft. Almost uncertain. Like she hadn't decided what the sentence meant yet. I didn't speak, just gave a small nod, barely visible, and kept walking. Out the glass doors, down the steps, into the kind of evening that feels like release. I didn't think about what Velma meant, or whether she regretted anything, or if she finally believed me. That wasn't mine to solve. And Delphine? I wasn't waiting for her to explain herself. There are moments in life when closure doesn't need conversation. Sometimes the most complete ending is silence, the kind that comes after you've finally stopped fighting for someone else's understanding. I walked to the parking lot. The car was warm from the afternoon sun, and when I slid into the driver's seat, I let out a slow breath that didn't feel stuck anymore. The plaque lay in the back seat. I didn't reach for it. Instead, I pulled off my shoes, tucked them beneath the passenger side, and rested both hands on the steering wheel. Not because I needed to drive away fast, but because I could. The sun dipped lower, stretching shadows across the lot. And I drove. Not away from anything, but toward everything that waited for me beyond this place. The road back toward town felt longer than usual, though it was probably just the quiet. No music, no phone calls, no one asking where I was or when I'd be home. I let the hum of the engine settle beneath my ribs while the last of the sun dipped behind the low hills of Santa Fe. I didn't go straight back to my apartment. Instead, I pulled into the overlook behind the venue, a small stone bench, a low wall, and a view that stretched all the way to the distant orange haze where the desert met the horizon. I parked, took the plaque from the back seat, and walked to the edge. I sat down. There were still smudges of setting sunlight along the skyline. Warm, muted, forgiving. The kind of light that doesn't ask anything of you. I let the award rest across my lap, not out of pride, but as something to hold. Something real. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt still. And that was new. A breeze moved over my shoulder, bringing the scent of mesquite and dry earth. Behind me, traffic buzzed faintly along the outer road, a reminder that the world continued turning, completely indifferent to what had happened today. That, too, felt like relief. People had started whispering about Delphine as soon as the lobby cleared. I didn't need to see the post to know what they said. Screenshots from the security video had already begun circulating. Some anonymous Twitter account had uploaded the footage, captioned with something brutal, like "This is what jealousy looks like." Delphine's name was trending in the wrong places. I knew because Lorelei texted me a screenshot with a single line. "You didn't have to say a word." I hadn't, and I wouldn't. Her fall didn't come from me. It came from her own hands, hands that couldn't stop cutting even when there was nothing left to take. She'd called Harlan 7 times. I knew because I saw her pacing the parking lot after he walked away. He didn't answer once. She stood by her car, phone pressed to her ear, then stared at it like it had betrayed her. But it hadn't. It had simply mirrored back what she gave. Velma, for her part, had gone quiet. Not the kind of silence that waits to speak, but the kind that realizes too late how much had been ignored. She stood a few feet away from Delphine near the end of the event, just standing, not hugging, not explaining. I caught her eyes once as I exited. She didn't follow. I didn't wait. Later, someone told me Delphine's employer had contacted her. HR wanted to review conduct standards. No one had fired her, not yet. But the calls had stopped. The brunches, the polite nods, the fragile little world she'd curated around titles and appearances. Gone, or cracking fast. None of that felt good to me. None of it hurt either. It just was. I sat a little longer on the bench, brushing my thumb over the engraved plaque in my lap. The words meant something, but they weren't why I came. They weren't why I stayed. What no one knew, what the headlines wouldn't capture, was that I almost didn't compete at all. That the night I finished the second dress, I cried over the hem. Not because of the sabotage I expected, but because of the part of me that still, even then, wanted someone to say, "You matter." I'd sewn the patch inside, not just as a tribute to my father, but as a reminder to myself. If no one else believes, I still can. The hardest part hadn't been forgiving Delphine. It was choosing not to need her forgiveness. That was the real release. By the time the sky had turned completely dark, only a few cars remained in the lot. Some staff, a few late guests. I gathered myself, stood slowly, and walked back toward my car. As I opened the door, I caught a glimpse of Velma standing near the building's glass entrance. She wasn't moving, just watching. She raised a hand halfway, as if to wave or to ask me to wait, but stopped herself. I didn't break stride. Some goodbyes don't come with words. I placed the award in the passenger seat and took one last look at the lights across the city below. Then I whispered, "Just for me." I don't need them to clap. I just needed to know I could still stand. I closed the door, turned the key, and backed out slow. The wheels hummed over the gravel, steady and sure. No revenge, no wreckage. Just the sound of leaving, and the kind of peace that makes no noise at all. "Hi, I'm Marlis. You ever find out something so gutting, so precise, it doesn't even make you mad? Just hollow?" My mother left everything to my sister. The house, the savings, even the life insurance. Like I was a stranger, not the daughter who paid their bills for years. They said I was the strong one, that I didn't need help. But what they really meant was, I wasn't worth including. And when I found the will, hidden in a drawer under expired coupons, I realized it wasn't just about money. It was about erasure. But that's not even the worst part. Want to know what came after that? What happens when you stop being silent and start asking for truth? Because once I started digging, I found something bigger. Much bigger. End of preview. Would you keep watching? That night, I didn't cry. I just packed my bag and left. No goodbyes. I reversed out of that gravel driveway with a practiced calm, The kind that doesn't shake even when your heart's pressing against your ribs. The Happy Birthday Mom banner was still fluttering in the porch light behind me. I never looked back at it. The drive back to my place in Minneapolis should have taken 2 hours, but I didn't keep track. I just kept moving. That's something I learned early. When you're not wanted in a room, your best exit is the quiet one. As the miles blurred, my phone buzzed a few times, notifications popping in. An Instagram story tag from Rowena, a missed call from Mom. I didn't touch the screen. I knew better. This wasn't the kind of silence they'd break with an apology. When I finally unlocked my apartment door, I didn't collapse or break down. I poured a glass of water, stared at the wall for a bit, and set the still-wrapped birthday gift I brought on the counter. It was a custom-made mug with a quote Mom used to say, "Family first, always." Now it read more like a punchline. The next morning, I woke up with a headache. Not from drinking, just from thinking too much. I opened my laptop, cleared out my inbox, and stared at the message from Rowena that had come in at 3:12 a.m. "You could have at least tried. Mom was hurt." No subject line, no salutation, no accountability. I replied with one sentence. "Tell Mom I'll try harder next time, to stay away." Click, sent, delete thread. The thing about being labeled the strong one is that it becomes an excuse, an easy way out for everyone else to not do better. Marlise will figure it out. She doesn't need the attention. She's got her own thing going on. I used to believe it too. Later that afternoon, I decided to swing by the bookstore down the block. I hadn't been there in a while, but I needed to remind myself what quiet felt like when it wasn't forced. While I browsed the nonfiction shelf, I overheard two women chatting about their daughters. "She's always been a handful," one said. "But I guess that's what love looks like, right? You show up anyway." That stopped me cold. Because the truth was, they didn't show up. Not for my graduation. Not when I moved into my first apartment. Not once in the 2 years I helped Mom cover Rowena's debts. I was just the support beam, necessary but invisible. That night, while reheating leftovers, I pulled out the small shoebox from the top of my closet. It held years of receipts, bank statements, wire transfers, and birthday cards I never sent. One envelope caught my eye. A thank you note from Mom, dated 2 years ago, after I paid for her root canal. Inside it read, "Thanks for always stepping up, even when no one asks you to." I folded it once, then again, and dropped it into the trash. That's when I decided. No more stepping up. Let them stand on their own. I canceled the monthly bank transfer to Mom's account. Not out of spite, out of clarity. The next morning, I got a voicemail from her. Short. Cold. "Call me. We need to talk. Things are getting tight." No greeting, no warmth, just need. I didn't call back. That Friday, I got an invitation to Rowena's bridal shower in the mail. Cream envelope, gold lettering, RSVP by next week. Venue, our childhood home. Host, Velda Crane. It felt like a joke without a punchline. Instead of ripping it up, I placed it back in the envelope and scribbled on the front. Wrong address. I dropped it into the mailbox outside my building. Let the postal service handle it. That weekend, I took myself out to dinner. Nothing fancy, just a booth at my favorite diner, a book in hand, and a slice of pie I didn't have to share. The waitress refilled my coffee and smiled. "Quiet night?" I smiled back. "The best kind." It was the first time I wasn't waiting for someone to join me. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the light outside had shifted, one of those dusky shades of blue that falls between day and night. I parked, killed the engine, and just sat for a while, hands on the steering wheel, staring at my reflection in the windshield. My phone was still lighting up with missed calls, but I wasn't reaching for it. Not tonight. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel sad either. I felt blank, in that numb sort of way you only get when disappointment stops surprising you. I used to think silence meant everything was okay. Lately, it started to mean the opposite. After grabbing my bag and heading upstairs, I let the apartment swallow me whole. Shoes off, lights low, I wandered toward the kitchen, then stopped. For some reason, I opened the junk drawer. Batteries, old menus, a takeout soy sauce packet. Nothing important. But it made me think of another drawer, another house, another time. I was 10 when I first noticed how people around me vanished during dinner. Not physically. They were all there, plates full, mouths moving. But it was as if I wasn't at the table at all. That particular night, Mom had promised it would be just the two of us. Dad had passed away less than a month before, and she told me she didn't want me eating alone so much. She even said she'd make spaghetti. I remember because I set the table myself. 2 plates, 2 forks, 2 glasses of that sparkling water she liked. I even folded the napkins like I'd seen her do when guests came over. Then the phone rang. I was sitting on the kitchen stool, swinging my feet off the floor when she answered. I only heard her half of the conversation. "Oh, sweetie, are you okay?" Followed by, "No, don't cry. I'll be right there." Next thing I knew, she was grabbing her keys, apologizing without really looking at me. "Rowena had a panic episode. I have to go. She needs me right now." "But you said," I started. I know. We'll do it tomorrow, okay? You're so good about these things, honey. I'll make it up to you." She left before I could say another word. I remember the way the kitchen light buzzed as I ate alone. I microwaved the pasta myself, lukewarm in the middle, but I didn't complain. I watched the plate spin, and I remember thinking, maybe if I'd cried louder, she would have stayed. Years passed, and small things like that kept stacking. Like the time I nailed my solo at the middle school recital. Mom was there, somewhere in the 3rd row. I had memorized every line, hit every note. The audience clapped. Rowena had gone before me, messed up her lines, froze halfway through. She cried behind the curtain. I saw Mom rush backstage to hold her like something was broken. Me? I got a thumbs up from a teacher. Later that night, as we walked to the car, Mom said, "You were great, Marlise. See? You don't need all that attention. You're strong." Back then, I thought it was a compliment. Maybe it was meant to be. But being strong became a sentence I didn't remember agreeing to. At 15, I got my first job at a local diner. One of those places with sticky menus and laminated photos of pancakes that never quite matched the plate. I worked Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, bussed tables, poured coffee, smiled at people who didn't tip. Every time I cashed out, I'd tuck away $20 into an envelope for Mom. She never asked me to. I just figured it helped. The house was always short on something. Groceries, heat, sanity. One month, the water almost got shut off. I paid the bill and never mentioned it. Another time, I bought toilet paper and paper towels for the whole house. Mom found them on the porch and said, "You're such a lifesaver." But she said it like she was thanking a delivery driver, not her daughter. Rowena never worked a shift. She had bad wrists, or bad friends, or a bad week. There was always something. And yet, every Christmas, Rowena had a pile of gifts under the tree. Name-brand shoes, perfume, concert tickets. Mine were always practical. Socks, gas cards, sometimes a handwritten coupon book that said things like, "One hug, redeem anytime." I wish I could say I used those. Back in the present, I was sitting on the edge of my bed, holding my latest paycheck. Direct deposit had come through. I'd already canceled the auto transfer to Mom's account earlier that week, but this was the first one I was keeping for myself in over 3 years. It felt strange. Like guilt and relief were wrestling in my chest. My phone lit up again. 3 missed calls from Mom, 2 from Rowena. I swiped and hit delete all. No message, no response. I used to think I had no choice but to stay. That leaving meant betraying some invisible code of daughterhood. But now I know silence is also an answer. But silence doesn't erase the weight of what they've taken. That drawer had nothing in it. At least nothing anyone else would notice. But something about the way it stuck when I pulled it open, the creak that echoed louder than it should have, made everything inside me shift. I wasn't looking for anything specific. Still, there I was, standing in my own bedroom, staring at paper clips and receipts, like I might find a piece of myself hidden in between. I closed it softly, walked back to the kitchen, and poured myself a glass of water. My eyes wandered to the sticky note on the fridge, the one I wrote last week, reminding myself to cancel the landscaping service. I still hadn't done it. Not because I needed the yard work, I didn't, but because that yellow square was one of the only things in this place I'd put there just for me. And somehow, it reminded me of her, of Mom, of the way she used to tape grocery lists on the fridge when I was a kid. Milk, eggs, bread, but never juice, because juice is a waste of money unless it's for Rowena. I still don't buy juice. I thought about that kind of thing a lot more after Dad died. I was 10, and nothing in the world made sense, except this one ridiculous fact. Nothing would be the same again. The funeral had barely ended when Mom started moving through the house, like a real estate agent showing someone else's property. She changed out the curtains, boxed up his clothes, cleared out the garage. When I asked her what we were doing with Dad's toolbox, she said, "We're donating it. We don't need reminders everywhere." I didn't argue. I just took his old flannel shirt from the laundry basket and hid it under my mattress. Later that week, I walked into the kitchen while she was on the phone. I remember standing quietly behind the doorway, just out of sight, as I heard her say, "No, it's all under my name now. The lawyer said everything transfers automatically. She's too young anyway. She doesn't need to know." I didn't need to know. That became a pattern. Decisions made in rooms I wasn't invited into. By the time I turned 15, I'd learned that money only made people more secretive, not generous. I took a job at the gas station near the edge of town. Minimum wage. Late nights. But it was mine. I used that money to buy toilet paper, dish soap, groceries. Not just for me, always for the house. One Saturday, I bought a bag of oranges. When I placed them on the kitchen counter, Rowena rolled her eyes and said, "Why did you get these? Nobody eats oranges." Mom chimed in with, "She's trying to be helpful. She means well." Like I was a well-intentioned stray dog. That summer, we had a family BBQ. Velda, because that's what I started calling her in my head, not Mom, invited all the aunts and cousins and neighbors she wanted to impress. She spent hours fussing over the flower arrangements and printed little menus like we were a country club. Rowena wore white, of course. She always did when she wanted attention. I stuck with a navy dress I bought secondhand. Somewhere between the baked beans and someone bragging about their third boat, I heard Rowena giggle and say, "Well, I dipped into my emergency savings this week. Gotta treat yourself sometimes, right?" My cousin Amanda looked up from her plate. "Wait, did your dad leave you that? Weren't both of you listed?" Rowena didn't skip a beat. "Well, technically yes, but I needed it more." Before I could say anything, Velda stepped in. "Marlise has always been the responsible one. She doesn't need help like Rowena does." I gripped my soda can so tight it nearly buckled. No one noticed. The thing about being responsible is that it's usually code for, "We don't have to worry about you," which really means, "We don't have to care out loud." I excused myself, went into the bathroom, and stood there until my heartbeat stopped tapping against my ribs. The next big slap in the face came the day Grandma passed. Grandma Helen was the only one in that family who ever treated me like I mattered. She came to every school event, sent handwritten cards, even when her arthritis was so bad her hand shook. She was my lifeline when the rest of the house treated me like an afterthought. I wrote a eulogy. Thoughtful, simple, honest. Folded it neatly and put it in my purse. At the service, I was in the second row, behind Rowena, of course. When it came time for tributes, I stood up and reached for the podium. Velda leaned in, her breath sharp in my ear. "Don't make this about you. Let Rowena speak. She was closer." I froze. My fingers tightened around the paper like it was the only thing holding me together. Rowena took the stage, sobbing on cue. She talked about how Grandma used to braid her hair, about cookies and bedtime stories. She forgot to mention how she stopped visiting after college. I never got to speak. I just sat down, my eulogy crushed in my palm, and watched the people who knew the least say the most. That night, I opened my keepsake box, smoothed out the folded paper, and tucked it in the back, behind old birthday cards and a pressed flower Grandma had given me. It was the first time I really understood something no one says out loud. Love can skip generations. After that, I started saying no more often. Not all at once. Not in a grand gesture, but quietly. No, I couldn't make it to Rowena's graduation dinner. No, I wouldn't lend Mom my car while hers was in the shop. No, I wouldn't be paying the cable bill because I wasn't watching it. At first, they tried guilt, then silence, then fake concern. You seem distant lately. You've changed. What's wrong with you? Nothing was wrong. That was the part they couldn't stomach. They always thought I'd stay quiet forever. But grief has a strange way of making you honest. And sometimes, honesty starts with looking in the wrong drawer. The document stared back at me like it had been waiting for years. It was late afternoon when I found it. The house empty, except for the ticking of a wall clock and the occasional creak of its old floors. Velda and Rowena had gone out for some brunch event, one of those social photo ops they called quality time. I told Mom I'd drop off some financial paperwork she had been asking for. Truth was, I needed a reason to come back here, and that reason had nothing to do with tax forms. The living room still smelled faintly of lavender plugins, covering the scent of mildew that never quite left the baseboards. I made my way down the hallway toward the guest room, where they still kept my old desk. The drawers were exactly as I remembered, stiff, scratched, and lined with the same yellow contact paper from when I was 12. The envelope I needed wasn't in the desk, of course, but my eyes kept drifting back toward Velda's bedroom across the hall. The door was slightly ajar. Sunlight fell in long strips through the blinds. It wasn't an impulse. It was a decision. I walked in, quietly, like the house might notice. Her room was spotless in that curated way you see in real estate showings. Bible verses framed above the bed, a pair of reading glasses on the nightstand, everything in its place. The top drawer of her dresser stuck a little before giving way. Coupons, old church flyers, 3 tubes of half-used lipstick, and tucked beneath it all, a thick yellow envelope. No label, no dust. Inside, the contents were neat, crisp, and deliberate. A notarized will, her signature in bold strokes at the bottom. My name appeared once, under emergency contact, and had a single line drawn through it in black ink. Everything else? Rowena. The house, the life insurance, the savings, all of it, every penny. There was a sticky note paper-clipped to the back page, filed with Nelson and Marks, 2020. I sat down on the edge of the bed, the will still open in my hands. I wasn't shocked, but something inside me stilled, like a dropped glass rolling to a stop on hardwood. I traced the ink with my finger. It felt like reading my own obituary. Even in death, she wanted to make sure I got nothing but a phone call. I returned the papers to the envelope, then to the drawer, exactly as I'd found them. That kind of silence, you don't disturb with noise. You let it sit and ferment until it stinks so bad even the cleanest room can't hide it. Still numb, I wandered back into the hallway and glanced toward the kitchen. Something told me to keep looking. If this was just the tip, what was the rest of the iceberg? On the bottom shelf of the pantry cabinet, behind the old crock pot Velda hadn't used since Dad died, I found a file box labeled Household. Inside were manila folders, bank statements, printouts, handwritten notes with dollar signs. I scanned the pages like someone reading someone else's diary and realizing they're in it more than they thought. My name appeared again and again, on bank transfers, electronic checks, emails printed out. Over the last 3 years, I'd sent over $42,000 home. $42,000. I knew I'd been sending money. Of course I knew, but I hadn't totaled it. I hadn't thought about it beyond the monthly auto transfer I set up back when Rowena had needed help with therapy bills. But here it was, laid out in black and white. my deposits lining up with Rowena's spa retreat, her cosmetic dental surgery, her down payment for the used BMW. Velda had even used some of it to cater Rowena's 30th birthday party, an event I hadn't even been invited to. That money wasn't charity, it wasn't a loan, it was love. But apparently, in this family, love was just another resource to reallocate. My hands were trembling, but my face stayed calm. I closed the box, slid it back into place, and stood up. I was still smoothing the hem of my shirt when I heard the front door open. Voices. Velda's laughter, Rowena's giggle. I stepped into the living room just as they walked in, both surprised to see me. "Well, you're still here," Velda said, setting her purse down. "Thought you'd be long gone." "I was just finishing up," I replied, holding up a manila folder like it was the reason I'd come. "Got what I needed." Rowena rolled her eyes and said something under her breath I didn't catch. Velda smiled, too bright. "We were just talking about that adorable waiter. What was his name, Ro?" "I don't know, Mom. He was 20. Relax." I tucked the folder into my bag and zipped it shut. "How was the brunch?" I asked, tone flat. Velda waved a hand. "Same old thing. You should have come. We always say you should get out more." I smiled. "I prefer spending money on things that return value." Neither of them responded. I didn't expect them to. I left without a hug, a goodbye, or a second glance. The sun had started to dip, casting long shadows down the sidewalk as I walked back to my car. That night, I sat at my desk with the file box open beside me and my laptop glowing in the dark. I opened a new document. Subject line: Revocation of Support Agreement, Immediate. My fingers hovered over the keyboard before they began to move. Not hesitating, just breathing between sentences. I outlined the full amount transferred, referenced the attached bank statements, and ended it with one clear statement. Effective immediately, I will no longer provide financial assistance to either Velda Crane or Rowena Bledsoe, in any form, direct or indirect. I attached the files, CC'd a personal legal advisor, and hit send. You don't scream at a wildfire. You let it burn until all that's left is what's real. I didn't sleep much that night, not because I was anxious, but because my mind felt like it had slipped into a higher gear. There's something strangely energizing about truth, when it finally becomes undeniable. You stop second-guessing yourself, you stop pretending, and when you stop pretending, you start doing. By sunrise, I had the letter finalized. I double-checked the attachments, bank records, payment history, and a signed affidavit outlining the timeline of support I'd provided over the past few years. I formatted it like a business memo. Clean, professional, not emotional. I included no "hope you're well," no closing thoughts. Just facts. At 7:04 a.m., I hit send. Less than an hour later, the first call came in from Velda. Then, another. By 10:30, I'd missed 7 total, including 2 from Rowena. I didn't answer any of them. I didn't want explanations. I wanted distance. At noon, a text from Velda finally came through. "You're being dramatic. We raised you better than this." That word, we. As if they were a unit. As if they'd both equally participated in raising me. As if they hadn't spent the last decade tag-teaming emotional negligence with backhanded compliments and passive withdrawal. I read the message once and archived it. Later that afternoon, while I was folding laundry and halfway through a podcast, I got a notification from someone I hadn't heard from in over a year. Jason. The message was short. "Hey, can we talk? It's about your sister. I didn't know who else to tell this to." I stared at the screen for a while before replying. We hadn't spoken since the breakup, which ended quietly and civilly, if not exactly on warm terms. He wasn't a bad guy, just not built for endurance. Still, something about his wording made my stomach tighten. We agreed to meet at a cafe downtown. Neutral ground. I chose a table near the window, not too far from the register, just in case I needed an excuse to leave early. Jason arrived on time, hair shorter, a bit more gray at the temples. He smiled politely as he slid into the seat across from me. "Thanks for meeting," he said, hands around a coffee cup like it was anchoring him. "What's this about, Jason?" I asked. My tone wasn't harsh, just flat, like a locked door with a peephole. "This isn't about us. I know you're not trying to go backward. I'm not either." I nodded once. "Good start." He let out a small breath. "Back when we were dating, your mom and Rowena came to me with a favor. Or what they called a favor." I tilted my head, not liking where this was going. "They asked if I'd co-sign a credit card for you," he said carefully. "Said you were trying to build your credit, that you were too proud to ask me directly, but you'd appreciate the help." I didn't say anything. I didn't blink. I just let the silence sit. "I thought it was odd," he continued, "so I told them I'd think about it. I never did it, never signed anything. But I didn't tell you either. At the time, I figured maybe they were just trying to help in their weird way." He finally looked up and met my eyes. "But now, with everything going on, I felt like you deserved to know." I nodded slowly, letting the weight of it sink in. "Did they give you a form? Paperwork? Anything with my name on it?" He frowned. "Yeah, a copy of an application. They had it filled out. Your name, birthday, even your old address. All they needed was my signature. And it looked like I had filled it out?" He hesitated. "Honestly? Yeah." The handwriting was close enough that I didn't question it. I leaned back in my chair. A flicker of heat moved through my chest, not from surprise, but from confirmation. A piece of the puzzle I didn't even know was missing had just clicked into place. "I should have told you sooner," he said quietly. "I'm glad you told me now," I replied. "That's more than either of them ever managed." We parted without small talk. No promises of staying in touch. Just a nod of acknowledgement. Two people tied by history, and now, reluctantly, by disclosure. Back home, I logged into my credit report. No active fraud popped up, but one flagged attempt had been recorded exactly 2 years ago. A soft inquiry on a line of credit. Denied for incomplete documentation. The lender's name matched the application Jason had mentioned. I sat there, staring at the screen, the corners of my mouth twitching into something that wasn't quite a smile. Not yet. "When people don't think you're watching," I whispered to myself, "they forget you know how to read the fine print." I printed the report, added it to the growing folder of documents on my desk. The cover page now read, "Evidence, Phase 1. At the top of that pile, a post-it note. I wrote it weeks ago before I had the full picture. It said, "When they ask why, I'll show them this." The notary office was quiet, almost sterile. A woman in scrubs was signing something across the counter, and a man in a gray hoodie scrolled through his phone, waiting for his turn. I stood in line with a folder in my hand, the weight of it so familiar now, I barely noticed it. When it was my turn, I slid the papers forward. The clerk gave me a perfunctory nod and flipped through the pages. "Need all of these stamped?" "Every last one," I said. My voice was calm, even measured. By the time I left, the sun had dipped low enough to stain the sidewalk gold. The documents in my bag rustled with each step. I didn't rush. I wanted to feel the full reality of what I was carrying, what they tried to bury in my name. Later that evening, after warming up leftover lasagna and folding laundry while the news played low in the background, I sat down at my laptop and opened a browser window. I was ready to apply for a loan. Nothing major, just enough to give a small push to a side business I'd been quietly working on. The application was simple. Standard fields, employment, income, savings, credit check. I filled it out with the steady hands of someone who'd always done things by the book. 3 days later, the phone rang. I let it go to voicemail, assuming it was spam. Then I checked the transcript. "Hi, Ms. Dennett. This is Jeff from First Northern Lending. Just calling regarding your recent application. I'm sorry to inform you we're unable to move forward at this time due to a flagged delinquent balance in the amount of $80,000. If this is unexpected, please give us a call and we can review it together. $80,000. I called back immediately, heart thudding but voice steady. The representative on the other end was polite, almost too polite, like someone trained to deliver bad news without getting yelled at. There's an account under your name, opened in March 3 years ago, he explained. Balance went unpaid for 27 months, flagged as a charge-off. That's impossible, I said, already opening my credit report tab again. I've never opened an account with that lender. He paused. Well, the name and address match. We can email you the original application and a copy of the signed documents. Please do, I said. When the email came through, I stared at it like I'd just opened a letter from someone who died years ago. There was my name, my home address, well, my old one, but the signature wasn't mine, not even close. It was neat, feminine, rounded, almost like someone had practiced signing my name from memory. I scrolled down further. The email address listed on the application was nearly identical to mine, off by one letter, just enough to avoid detection. It was subtle, clever, and I knew exactly who did it. That week, I went through my archived inbox and found something from Velda, dated a few days before the credit card was supposedly opened. Can you send me a copy of your ID again? I need it for some paperwork. I lost the one you gave me last spring. At the time, I'd thought nothing of it. I had scanned my license and emailed it without a second thought. It was Mom, after all. Now, it felt like I'd handed them a loaded weapon. I dug deeper, through old tax documents, through shared folders, anything that might give me a clearer picture. That's when I found a separate envelope tucked inside an old college folder, a rejection letter from a local community grant I'd applied for senior year. Only, I didn't remember applying for that grant. Confused, I called the office listed on the letterhead. A young woman picked up. I explained who I was and asked if they had a record of my application. After a moment, she confirmed they did, and even offered to send me a PDF copy for my records. The file arrived 10 minutes later. My name, my student ID. But the essay? I wrote about my struggle with anxiety and how my younger sister always pushed me through the darkest moments. It wasn't mine, not the voice, not the story. Rowena had written it, about herself, using my name. I sat back in my chair, holding my coffee cup against my palm until the heat dulled. They'd been using me as a shadow, not a person, not a daughter, just a signature. By the time I called my lawyer, I had compiled everything: email records, bank statements, the fraudulent credit application, the plagiarized essay. I didn't hesitate when her assistant answered. I need to file for identity fraud, I said plainly. There are forged documents, stolen funds, and a pattern. She took my number. 20 minutes later, my lawyer called back. This is serious, she said, voice sharp but focused. We'll need affidavits and hard copies. I suggest we begin documenting every point of access they had to your information. And if they used it without permission? Then we escalate. This isn't a civil disagreement anymore, Marlis. This crosses into criminal territory. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Good, I'm done being quiet. After we hung up, I spent hours organizing the binder I labeled accountability. I didn't even realize how much I'd gathered until I flipped through and saw just how many times I had put my trust where it wasn't deserved. The next morning, I walked into the notary office with that binder under my arm. The woman behind the counter smiled. What can I help you with? I need to get some things certified, I said, placing the folder down with both hands. All of them. She flipped through the documents, one by one, and stamped each with the rhythmic confidence of someone who'd done it 1,000 times before. By the time she reached the last page, I was already standing straighter. The difference between silence and submission is a signature. Mine's real. 2 weeks after the notary stamped the final page, I stepped into the office of Halbert and Wren with the kind of calm that doesn't come from peace, but preparation. My binder, now thicker, heavier, sat across from my attorney, Ms. Halberd, who had already opened her laptop and clicked into a case file titled Dennett v. Crane, Bledsoe. "Are you sure you want to move forward?" she asked, even though we both knew my answer. I nodded. "I've been sure for a long time. I just didn't have the proof." She clicked her pen, pulled a formal packet forward, and handed me a document with neat legal headings and too much white space between paragraphs. Civil suit, criminal complaint, identity theft, financial fraud, emotional damages. The words blurred for a second before I signed. She added the page to the file, closed it gently, and said, "We'll serve them this week." The next day, Rowena posted a story on Instagram. It was a blurry photo of a wine glass beside a candle, captioned with, "Some people think blood means silence. Good luck with that." No tags, no names. But she knew I'd see it. Velda left a voicemail that night. Her voice was composed, but under the surface, it cracked like old paint. "Marlis, this is your mother. I don't know what you think you're doing, but you're tearing this family apart. We raised you better. This isn't how families solve things. Call me." I didn't return the call. I just saved the voicemail to my case file. "She didn't raise me," I muttered to myself in the kitchen, pouring coffee the next morning. "She used me." The courthouse smelled like paper and old wood and a hint of floor wax. There's a kind of hush in those hallways that feels rehearsed, like everyone's pretending to be civilized while holding knives in their sleeves. I arrived 15 minutes early. Ms. Halberd was already there, focused, tapping her pen against a leather portfolio. We greeted with a nod, no small talk. This wasn't a social visit. Across the aisle, Rowena walked in wearing sunglasses, even though we were indoors. Her outfit looked expensive in that loud but trendy way she always preferred. Velda followed behind, wearing a soft cream blouse and carrying a handkerchief she didn't need. She clutched it like a stage prop. They looked like mother and daughter. I must have looked like something else entirely, but that was fine with me. When the judge entered and called the preliminary hearing to order, I stood straighter. I didn't look at Rowena or Velda. I looked at the bench, at the person holding the gavel, not because I thought justice was guaranteed, but because I wanted to see the look on their face when they read my name, not as a line item in someone else's scheme, but as the one bringing the charges. The judge listened, asked procedural questions, reviewed the packet. Then, in a tone so neutral it almost vanished, they said, "Discovery will be scheduled. Parties are to submit financial documentation within 30 days. It wasn't a victory, not yet, but it was oxygen. After the hearing, while we waited in the lobby for our attorneys to arrange paperwork, Velda came toward me. She walked slowly, like a woman carrying sorrow instead of guilt. "You really want to do this to your own mother?" she asked, her voice low. I looked her in the eye, not flinching. "I'm not doing this to my mother. I'm doing this for the daughter you never bothered to raise." Her mouth opened, then closed. The pause wasn't hesitation, it was realization. She saw for the first time that she couldn't shift the blame this time. Rowena joined her, huffing. "Seriously, Marlis? Do you think any of this will make you look good? You think people are suddenly going to see you as the poor little victim?" I didn't answer. I was already turning away when she added, louder this time, "You'll always be second, Marlis. Always." I paused, just enough to meet her gaze over my shoulder. Maybe, but second is still better than being a liar. The doors closed behind me, muffling whatever came next. Justice, I realized, doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's quiet. It shows up in court filings and postage stamps and rooms where no one expects you to speak. But the price of truth wasn't paid in court. It was paid at home. I didn't cry. Not this time. I just folded the letter back into its envelope and slid it into the drawer where old warranties and expired coupons went to die. 6 words. That's all Velda had written. Tell them I never loved her. It didn't hurt like I thought it might. There was a strange relief in it, honestly. The kind of relief that comes when someone finally says out loud what you felt all along. It wasn't shocking, it was just confirmation. That same morning, my phone buzzed with a notification. A message from the law office. Property title transfer complete. Settlement check finalized. No further documents pending. I stared at the screen for a full minute before realizing what it meant. The house, the one I grew up in, the one they had clung to like a trophy, was gone. Sold. Turned into a dollar amount used to settle a debt that shouldn't have existed in the first place. Later that week, I drove past it. Just once. The yard hadn't been mowed in weeks. The porch railings, which my father had once stained by hand, were splintering. The red and white for sale sign had been replaced with a yellow one. Sold. The window blinds were drawn tight. The entire place looked like it was holding its breath. I parked across the street for a few minutes, engine running, hands loose on the steering wheel. My reflection stared back at me in the windshield, superimposed on the ghost of a house that once held my entire world. But the weirdest part? It didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a place where something had ended. Something long overdue. A week later, I got another update. This time from the same legal assistant. Velda Crane has relocated to Lakeside View Apartments, Unit 3B. A retirement complex not far from the edge of town. No front yard, no porch swing. Just a narrow balcony overlooking a parking lot. She called once after the move. I let it go to voicemail. Hey, I just thought maybe you'd want to know I'm okay. The place is small, but it's fine. I'm getting by. Anyway, you probably don't care. Click. She didn't sound angry, just tired. But I didn't call her back. Not because I wanted revenge, because I didn't have anything left to give. Velda had always been good at keeping appearances, even when the foundation was rotten. But now the masks had slipped, and I wasn't about to put them back on for her. As for Rowena, she disappeared almost entirely. Her social media accounts were deleted, phone disconnected. Mutual acquaintances said she'd moved 2 counties over, took up a management job at some gas station off the interstate. One friend forwarded me a blurry photo from a birthday party. Rowena standing off to the side, drink in hand, smiling half-heartedly. I stared at that picture for a while. Not because I missed her, because for the first time in years, I felt indifferent. I used to ache at the sound of her voice, the memory of her laugh. I used to run mental reruns of childhood birthdays, of whispered jokes under blankets, of her calling me little genius, with that grin only she could pull off. But all of that was before the lies, before the signatures, before the silence. Some people fall from your life like leaves, others like anchors. I got the letter on a Wednesday. No return address, no name on the envelope. Just 6 words scribbled in shaky cursive on a piece of lined paper, folded twice. Tell them I never loved her. I stared at it for a long time. Not because I didn't believe it, but because I did. Deep down, I think I'd always known. I just hadn't heard it in writing before. I didn't call her. I didn't rip the letter up. I didn't even cry. I just took a deep breath, walked to the kitchen, and taped it to the inside of my pantry door. Somewhere I'd see it sometimes and remember exactly what not to become. That night, I made dinner for one. Roasted vegetables, rice pilaf. A glass of red wine that didn't taste like regret. I put on an old playlist, the kind with songs that made the house feel less empty and more full of choice. After eating, I stepped out onto my balcony. The city moved quietly below, people walking dogs, grocery bags rustling, an occasional siren in the distance. Life, indifferent and steady. I wrapped a blanket around my shoulders and looked up at the darkening sky. There was no poetic closure, no apology worth saving, no reunion on the horizon. But there was peace, a kind that doesn't come from fixing what's broken, but from finally walking away from it. The days began to blur in the way they do when things stop hurting, but haven't yet started healing. I moved through them like someone pacing herself, not out of exhaustion, but out of respect for what she'd just survived. It had been 6 months since the court hearing. 6 months since the voicemail from Velda. Since the letter with 6 words that didn't break me. I hadn't heard from either of them since. That morning, I woke up to the scent of cinnamon and ground coffee. My apartment was quiet, but not the lonely kind of quiet I used to hate. It was lived in silence, the type that gently says, "You're safe here." I stood in the kitchen with my mug in hand, watching the steam rise, tracing patterns on the surface. The calendar on the fridge had real plans written in my handwriting now. Book club on Thursday, doctor's appointment next Monday, potluck at the bookstore. Nothing extravagant, just life. Normal, unremarkable, free. By mid-morning, I was behind the register at the shop. The bell above the door jingled with each customer. I shelved new arrivals, rang up paperbacks, made small talk with locals about weather and dogs, and who forgot their reusable bag again. For the first time in my adult life, I worked a job not because I needed the paycheck, but because I liked the way it felt to help people find the right words. During my break, I sat in the back corner with a thermos and the letter Velda had sent months ago. I'd kept it. Folded, faded, stained slightly from a teacup I'd once set on top of it. It didn't hold power anymore, but it held clarity. I read it again, quietly. The words hadn't changed, but the way I received them had. Then I flipped it over and wrote one word in sharp capital letters. Returned. I folded it again and dropped it into the back pocket of my purse. Not to send. Just to remind myself that not everything handed to you has to be accepted. Saturday came with a crisp breeze and a flea market on Lake Street. I wandered the aisles of second-hand scarves, mason jar candles, mismatched mugs. That's when I saw Jason. He was thumbing through a box of old records, a knit beanie pulled low on his head. He looked up, startled in that way people do when they recognize someone they never expected to see again. "Hey," he said. "Hey," I replied. We didn't hug, didn't mention the past. He held up a James Taylor album. "Still your go-to for rainy days?" I smiled. "That or Cat Stevens?" He nodded. "Good taste, you always had that." We talked for 5 minutes, 10, maybe, about music, about vinyl, about how crazy it was that a jar of homemade pickles at one booth cost more than a hardcover. Then he checked the time and said, "Well, take care of yourself, Marlies." "You too," I said. And that was it. No apology, no closure. Just two people who once knew each other well, now standing with enough distance between them to call it peace. Back at the bookstore, late that afternoon, a young girl came in with her mother. The girl looked no older than 7, bright-eyed, curious. "She's looking for a book you might remember," her mom said. "Something about a mouse and a cookie?" I smiled. "If you give a mouse a cookie, classic." I led the girl to the shelf, pulled out the worn copy, and handed it to her. She held it like a treasure. Her mother knelt to adjust the girl's coat and whispered, "She reminds me of my youngest. Strong, but quiet." I didn't flinch at the word. Strong. For a long time, that word felt like a sentence. Now it felt like a mirror. Later that night, I lit a candle, fed my cat, and poured a glass of water. Not wine, not celebration. Just water. I sat by the window, watering the small fern I'd kept alive for almost 2 years now, my longest successful relationship with a plant. I watched the city hum below me, cars passing, porch lights flicking on, the distant chatter of lives I'd never know. And I felt something soft settle in my chest. Not triumph, not joy, but something quieter and steadier. Peace. The kind that doesn't need to be declared. The kind that just is. I used to think I had to be loud to be heard. Turns out, leaving is the loudest thing I ever did. Some names stay off the will, and some hearts stay out of the fire. I learned how to be both,